So welcome to Kokoro Conversations. I'm Alex Lang. I'm here with Rebekah Anderson. And today we're going to be talking about the concept of time. And I want to dive right into it with a little bit of a hypothetical. So I want you to imagine that you were given a cancer diagnosis. And the doctor tells you that you have a year to live. But he says, for the first 6 months, you're going to live as you normally have. Like you're not going to see any difference in the way that you live. But the following 6 months after that, the 6 months, before you die, you're going to be riddled with all kinds of complications. You're going to be hurting. You'll be in pain. So the question becomes, how are you going to live those first 6 months where you're normal before you start really experiencing the side effects of it? What are you going to do? So you get this diagnosis. The question is, what are you going to do with that?
Wow. I mean, what comes to mind, of course, is like specific things I'd like to do, places I want to go, people I want to spend time with, foods I want to eat without really worrying about it, things like that. So
top places. What are the top places?
Top places I'd want to travel to or things like that.
That you haven't been able to do yet.
Oh gosh, I think I would really just want to leave the United States and start kind of working my way. I'd start in Europe and kind of just go east, kind of try and cover as much ground as I can, spending good time in Europe and Asia.
Top place. What's the place you've always wanted to go to? Would you have an idea?
What honestly comes to mind, I love to go to Morocco.
Why?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Why?
Well, I think it's this northern part of Africa. So you're kind of between the lower part of Europe and you're at the very top of Africa, right on this beautiful coast, right on the water. There's a really rich culture there that has both kind of African influence, Islamic influence. The language there is beautiful. The people there are really warm and welcoming. I've heard the food is amazing.
Is there some site that you want to see there?
I kind of just like to be in that area where I feel like you have access to all of these different little towns, not necessarily sites there. All these different places are coming to mind now, things I haven't seen that I've wanted to see. So I would love, for instance, I've never seen the Northern Lights. I want to go somewhere where I can see the Northern Lights. I want to go and kind of be able to be in these beautiful oceans that I've seen pictures of but haven't experienced.
And would you want to do it with anybody? Is it just you there, or would you take people along with you?
I think I'd take people along with me. I love to travel by myself a lot of the time because I can take my time. I don't have to worry about kind of taking too long at a certain place or being rushed along to do this and that. I can make my own itinerary. I can go where I want to go. So I think I'd want to go with a group of people, but there might be some experiences that I'd like to have on my own on that. But really, I'd love to be surrounded by the people I love most, for sure, on that.
Yeah, I think for me, I think top place for me right now would be Japan. Ooh. So I'd want to go to Japan. I have always loved the culture there, but probably the biggest thing that I'd want to see if I could do it is I want to see some of the Buddhist temples that are there, but I also want to experience, if I can, I don't know if you've watched with me at some point, Gyro.
I can never say his name
yeah,
right.
Yeah, I think that might be wrong. Gyro Dreams of Sushi. So that documentary where I watched that, I was like, first of all, I love sushi to begin with, so it's one of my favorite foods. But to have an experience like that, I mean, everybody talks about that. It's not just like a 3-star Michelin rated restaurant. They talk about it as being almost like a spiritual experience going to that restaurant. So I know that I couldn't get into his restaurant, but his son's is more accessible. So that's the one that I want to go to. Everybody says it's the same quality. It's just less pressure because he puts pressure on people. But I really would love to go and see Japan. For whatever reason, that culture has always been something that has been really fascinating to me. And I would definitely want to go. I think if I was going to take somebody with me, I'd go with my wife for sure. I would love to have my sons with me too. Now, it's interesting. So let's say I got this diagnosis now. So my sons are in middle school.
Yeah.
they're not at that point right now where it's like they absolutely have to be there all the time. So if I got it right now, I probably would pull them out of school and we'd go travel for those 6 months before I got really sick. And we just do all the things that I've wanted to do, and I'd spend time with them. And then possibly I'd invite friends who could afford it, or if I could pay for them, to come with us to enjoy certain things like that. So I think Japan would be at the top of the list. What are some other experiences that you think you might want to have?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking of. A big part of why I love the answer of Japan is because their culture is a different experience altogether. Food isn't just something that satiates your body, it's an actual experience. So, yeah, I mentioned food because there's a lot of food I would want to eat. There's a lot of places I want to see. To me, one of my favorite things to do anytime I travel is to go to the big museums in these different places. So getting to walk through museums and see these works of art and see just like the work of art that is nature in different places, that to me is a big experience that I would want to have. But I think like moments of just really, it's interesting, like unscheduled time in new places is a spiritual experience for me. I went on a vacation earlier this year to see cherry blossoms in bloom in the Northeast. And a big thing that I just, like one of my favorite times of that week I had off was just walking through the streets of a city that I hadn't been to before. And we ended up, the friend who I was traveling with, she and I, we ended up coming across this like entire alleyway that was a work of art. We weren't seeking it out, we just kind of came across it. And it was just a moment of real awe and wonder. So I would love to have moments where I just maybe don't even have a specific aim, but I'm just allowed to go and be out and experience that. I would want to have a lot of meals with people I care about. There's something so special about just gathering and talking. I would want to listen to live music, like hear any kind of music. I think would be really amazing to me. So I think just opening myself up to have those sorts of experiences. To me, I loved being a ballet dancer for years. I would want the opportunity to get on a stage, not for an audience, but I would want to dance again.
Yeah, so something, it sounds like the things that bring you joy, that's like the most, that's kind of like core to what you would try to do. I mean, I think it's interesting because you talk about this whole idea of like wanting to go out and maybe just encountering things without precondition in your mind of I'm going to do X, Y, Z. I think sometimes it's an interesting aspect of like what makes life really beautiful is kind of the random happenstance of what you come upon around things, as opposed to, and it's so interesting because it's like in this scenario where you have cancer, I think a lot of times we go to, well, I have this list, it's bucket list items, like I got to do these things, and if I don't do these things, then I will have missed out on X, Y, Z. But I think that you're right to point out that a lot of times the most fulfilling things that we come across are things that we weren't anticipating, things that we didn't, that we just literally stumble upon. And it's interesting. You talk about, like, I was thinking about, I was going to ask you, would you climb a mountain? And then it made me think of the one place I think I would absolutely like to go is in Sri Lanka. There's Sripada or Adam's Peak, which is a pilgrimage site where supposedly Adam's foot or Buddha's footprint or whatever it is. Whether or not that's real is less important than the fact that so many people talk about that particular hike up that mountain being a really religious type of experience or a spiritual experience where you feel connected to the world. And it's, to me, what's interesting is what you're talking about is like the things that you want to do are all about like creating deeper sense of connection, like going to a concert, like when you're at live music. Would you agree? Like, I feel like there's something about live music or ballet or any of these kind of performative arts where you're watching somebody, but then you kind of feel like you're part of something, and it's like that beautiful experience of being with people it's like the oneness that brings you together.
Yeah, that's like Emil Durkheim calls it collective effervescence, these moments where we all come together and have a moment of awe and wonder together. And to me, the collective effervescence is always amazing. To me, I also really value these experiences that are just me. Like, you ask about climbing a mountain, absolutely. There's something to me that whenever I'm going through a period of transition or trying to figure something out, there is something very special about being able to go up to a high place and look out and see things from that different perspective. And just the journey up, I mean, it's a religious pilgrimage almost just for you. And so to me, I value both experiences in a group, but also experiences that feel like they're kind of just for me. There's something very special to that for me, but you also reminded me, one of the things I've always wanted to do is the Camino de Santiago, that religious pilgrimage in Spain and France. I think that would be an amazing thing to do, just the experience of kind of walking to those sacred sites. But there's something really unique about those sorts of places, like even in Sri Lanka, where when you are going with other people who are seeking an experience like that, often these kind of out of the ordinary moments do kind of present themselves to people on those journeys.
Yeah. No, it's interesting the different ways that people would spend their time. And I often read about people who have gotten those diagnoses and kind of how they spent their time. Oftentimes they're not given, they're going when they start to feel sick. So they oftentimes are not feeling well enough. So in our scenario, you have perfect health, but you have the foresight to know. A lot of times for people who are given those diagnoses, they're not doing well.
Right.
And so it's hard for them to kind of live that out. So it's an interesting question, I think, of trying to, when you see those people who have been given that diagnosis, they try to do things that they want to do.
Yeah.
As much as they can, but they may not be in a position where it's feasible, right?
Right.
Just because of their ability. So the fact is that you and I, we don't have that diagnosis, right? But the question then becomes, why do we not live our lives that way? Our lives are not truncated, but so we've just talked about all the things we would do, but we haven't done those things. Mm-mm. And we haven't made plans to do those things. So the question is, why not?
Because one of the things I'm conscious of, neither of us said, I'm going to do my work or I'm going to do my day-to-day tasks as usual. I do think the kind of beauty of this life, I've known a lot of people, honestly, in the past couple of years who have passed away. And what I find kind of amazing about when they come to the end of life, it's not these extraordinary experiences for them that are what they cherish the most. It's really normal moments. So someone I really love, a supervisor of mine, she was given a fatal diagnosis and she has 3 little boys. Mm. And the thing she wanted most was to see her oldest son, go to kindergarten.
Wow.
Yeah. And so what I find interesting is, of course, when we have this time to plan, we find ourselves saying, I want these mountaintop moments. And I do know that the people who I've lost, they probably would have wanted those mountaintop moments as well. But I also think that the reality is those cherished moments that they had gave them an opportunity to get really clear about what they wanted and what they didn't. There's a lot that gets in our way, though. I mean, we have practical needs. I need to work to keep a living. I need to find a way to afford where I live. If you're sick, your medical bills need to be covered. So I know that I love my job. I want to show up for work because I really love the work that I would want to do. But I just think when my life is over, the reality is my job and the thing that I spend a lot of time and energy putting my life into so that I can afford to just live, it keeps me from seeking out these experiences that I really do want to have before my life comes to an end. And so it's an interesting kind of thing because I also derive a lot of meaning from it, but
Right. So, but neither of us said, "Oh, I would keep working." Like almost in our minds, right? The immediate thing you would do is you'd quit your job, right? You'd be like, "Okay, like I'll take whatever money I have in savings." If you, I mean, assuming that you can afford to do these things, you may not have the money to be able to just travel and do whatever you want. But I want to jump back to something that you said, a second ago, because I think that it actually really points out kind of. I think you were very wise to say, we talk about the mountaintop moments, but for a lot of people, for most people, those are the things that they actually don't matter as much. Like those are experiences we want to have, right? But the things that really make life meaningful, you're right, are the little teeny moments that actually you personally probably aren't even recognizing in the moment are really critical to your relationships and who you are. And so what's interesting is that in some ways, as when you have time with people, like when you're given maybe a truncated amount of time due to a diagnosis, when you take the time to just be with them, regardless of whether you're out climbing a mountain or regardless of whether you're doing things that are like, I have to do this before I die, what they probably won't remember are, all of those big things that you did. Oh, we got to this temple, or we had this meal, although they may remember it. But what they're going to remember most are little details about that, little things that were said or weren't said, moments that in their minds just stick. And those are the things that tend to matter most. And actually for the people who are passing away, oftentimes if you really ask them, what are the things that you remember about your life? It's not huge, important moments that we would sit there and on the timeline of how we recall a person's life, we often say, oh, well, he was born here and he went to school here and he got this job and he married this person and he had these children. So those are like the big moments. Those are demarcating factors, right, in our lives. Yet, those are not the things that for an individual person, even though that demarcates our time, what makes that time worthwhile are little details in those moments. And I think that that's a very wise thing that you bring up, because our initial thing was, we got to do all these things. But in reality, what we should be aiming for is just straight up time with people who we love, right? Yeah. Or for ourselves, time for ourselves. To be within ourselves. So I don't know how you feel about that, but I think that I thought that was interesting what you said with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of why I struggle to even think about what I would want to do, like the thing that I have been wanting to do that I haven't done. Because I think if I was nearing the end of my life, I would think to myself, what matters most to me isn't necessarily what I haven't done, although there are a lot of things that I would want to do. It would be, who has made this life meaningful, and how do I do the most of what's already been most meaningful in my life? Mm-hmm. I don't think, I've looked at these questions and wondered about that, but I'm really realizing that kind of in real time, that I think if I can't have those meaningful experiences with the people who made my life the most meaningful, because the reality is it is people that have made my life most meaningful, like the relationships. And some of the experiences that have been most meaningful to me, that aren't about people, they've been made richer by the people in them.
The geographical location of where you go, in some ways, matters far less than the people you're experiencing it with. Because, I mean, if you go somewhere on your own, which not to diminish the individual experiences that we have as humans, those are important experiences. But if I went somewhere with somebody and I can turn to you and I can say, do you remember when we did this thing? Yeah. Do you remember when we were doing this together? That's the feeling of the shared experience of, oh yeah, I remember when you did this, or I remember when we did that. And vice versa, when you're in a group of people and two people start talking about an experience they had and you weren't there, how outside do you feel? You feel like an outside. Well, I wasn't part of that experience, and clearly they had an amazing time. This is very important to them, right? So I think you're right to point that out. So I think when we're talking about how we think of time in our lives, which is kind of a big point of what we're talking about, right? I do think that for humans, time with people and time with people who you love and care for can never be, I think that is like in some ways the pinnacle of the mountain for most people. I think that is the truth.
I so agree. I mean, I just think about when I think about the happiest moments of my life, or the moments that brought me the most meaning, sometimes they were like in a really incredible place. Sometimes it was in some unique location that brought out a kind of new vision for me. But a lot of time, it's really moments that were extremely ordinary, surrounded by the people I love the most, or surrounded by a really deep sense of connection and love. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what I would be trying to create, no matter where it is. If it could be an amazing location, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's like a bonus,
yeah,
right? But I mean, you can, as long as you're with people
yeah,
who you love and who love you, I think that's the most important thing to do with your time. So this brings up an interesting question, mm-hmm. right? So if these are things that we know we should be doing, mm-hmm. why do we not live our lives that way? Because we're sitting here in our little thought experiment. We've come up with we've determined what's the most important thing, what brings us the most meaning, mm-hmm. and yet I would say we probably don't spend most of our time doing that, right? Like you pointed out, well, you have to work. Now, in your particular profession, you do spend a lot of time with people, and your job is to form relationships, right? And as was mine for a long time. So we are benefited in that way that was kind of what the structure of what we're supposed to do. But that's not necessarily what everybody's out there doing. In fact, the vast majority of people, that's not really what they're there to do. They're working a job and they're performing a function, and that function gives them income, and that income, I was talking with somebody about this literally last night, where he was saying that this guy was talking about retirement. And he said, it's called Dying with Zero, or Leaving with Zero, something like that is the name of the book. And the idea is that if you die with $400,000 in the bank, let's just say as an example, he's like, that was 6 years of your life that you gave up for that money, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're not going to spend like basically time, you're trading time for money. Like right now you're making money for, and you're giving up your time. And those two things are correlated. So if you die, with $400,000 in the bank, and it took you those 6 years to earn that, you gave up 6 years of your life for nothing. You didn't even use that money for the thing that you wanted it for. And so I thought that was a really interesting point, which is to say that we work, right, in our lives to fund our lives, and that work takes up usually a lot of our time, more time than we probably would prefer. And then we have what's left over. You think about a normal week. What are you doing? You get up in the morning, you do some things, you go to work, you work during the day. And then at night, you get to come home and be with yourself or your family or whoever, right? But when you think about that, like by the time you get to the end of the day, you've used the best part of yourself, all of your energy for the job, because that's what you had to do. And now everybody gets home and they're exhausted. They're tired. Now you got to make a meal. You got to clean up that meal. And it's great. You're still spending time with people, but you didn't have the best part of your day was given to like the most of your energy, your resources, your mental resources were all given to that other thing. So I think that begs the question, right? Is that, we just talked about what the best use of our time is. Clearly, would you agree that's not necessarily the best use of our time?
Absolutely. I mean, time is the most precious, non-renewable resource that any of us has. Are we ever taught that? No. We have to figure it out on our own, and usually we figure it out due to a really intense event in our lives. It's not something that we're usually aware of until it's a little bit too late, until we have to compensate for time that's been lost. And it is so unfortunate that so much of our time and our energy ends up being placed towards the things that we maybe don't value the most, leaving us with little time and little energy to devote to the people and the things that we care about most in the world and in our lives. And it's to our detriment. I mean, a lot of people, for a period of time, researched a lot of people who'd gotten a serious diagnosis and then kind of did what you were talking about. Like, what did they want to do with their time with that 6 months in our hypothetical situation? A lot of the time, people did what you said. They quit their job, they pursued the things that they loved most in life, and a lot of times the illness was miraculously dealt with. And it kind of shows that there's a correlation between spending our time in ways that we don't value and becoming sick.
Interesting.
We make ourselves sick by pursuing these things that aren't really worthy of our time. And I have to tell you, like, one of my thoughts when I thought about your question about this hypothetical with time is, I thought, God, I would say no to a lot more. Like, I would say, yeah, that's not really worth my time. When the reality is, there's a lot in my life that I could say no to and say, that's not really worth my time. But I'm like, I've got plenty of time, right? That's just how I approach things. And I like to be generous with people. I like to be giving and open. But who am I serving in the end by choosing that? Yeah.
Well, you bring up a point, which is to say, you said, I have plenty of time. We assume that to be true.
Right.
We've been talking about illness. We could get in a car accident tomorrow, and that could be it. As much as we want to believe that it'll just go on and on, we could, just from random happenstance. I know people who have literally dropped dead from a heart attack. They were healthy, they were young, and it just happened in a moment. So there's nothing to really, there's no guarantee of this. And I think that this is kind of an interesting aspect of how we live as humans, right? So you pointed out, we live in a society where we're kind of forced into, in a way, or we are taught to believe that we're doing things that are for our betterment, which is to provide resources for ourselves. That's what we're taught to believe, right? When in reality, I think if you were given the choice, you probably wouldn't do that.
Right.
So that's one aspect of it, right?
Yeah.
Is that you're doing those things. Then the other aspect that you kind of buy into is that time is an infinite resource, as you said, like that it'll just go on and on and on. And so we kind of fool ourselves into that, into thinking that. And I think that those two fallacies in our lives, it creates this kind of unfortunate perspective and drive in a lot of people, which at the end, when you get to the end of your life, you sit back and you say, did I do the thing that I should have done? And I think that some people say, well, when I get to the end of my life, if I have X number of dollars in my bank account, I did what I needed to do. I provided, which I think for some people, right? Like if you grew up in poverty, for example, and you never had enough, well, that's something that, like, if you get to the end of your life and you have money and you didn't have that, to you, that's a successful life, right? Like I get that. I totally get that. And you might sit there and say, yes, whatever I had to sacrifice to get there because I didn't eat when I was a kid, I didn't have the resources I needed, and now I do, totally worth the sacrifice, right? So I do think that that although we can sit there and we can say on the one hand, yes, for sure, if there was no, the distribution of resources was equal, and everybody could just do what they wanted to do, I think in our perfect world, yes, you would be able to, you wouldn't have to work very much. You could focus on the things that mattered. Yeah. But because there's an unequal resource distribution that goes on, right? Well, what people spend their time doing, it really changes based on what you feel is worth your time. It changes based on kind of who you are. So, I think this is an interesting question. So in your line of work, which is akin to, something that a nurse or a doctor or a counselor would do, right? Yeah. You do spend your days talking and being with people and forming relationships with them. So do you feel like when you look back on your life, at least to where you are now, right? If you got that cancer diagnosis and you were going to be dead in a year, and you knew that, would you feel as though the time that you had spent here, based on now you chose a very specific kind of profession, do you feel like that it balanced out more than it would have had you just had to work a job just to provide for yourself, basic, with none of that relational interaction?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I'm like one of the first people in my family that has a job that is like a helping profession. So I don't come from a long line of people who had work that was nearly as life-giving or as meaningful as the work that I do. Not that their work wasn't meaningful. They were very productive. On my dad's side of the family, I come from a long line of like railroaders. So they're doing work that obviously is meaningful in that
it helps the country. It moves things around, gets people from one place to another. I mean, that's important.
Yeah, like you get people where they need to go. You help create a safe environment. I know that in my dad's case, he really was somebody who was super attentive. So he has told me that he's like saved people's lives by pulling them off a railroad track when they didn't see a train coming. So they derive meaning in that way. But I mean, if my dad had 6 months to live, I can tell you, he'd be like, I'm done with work. I'm not showing up. Are you kidding me? He was so happy to retire. Whereas I think that in my line of work, like I just derive so much joy from building relationships, and that's a lot of what I do. When I look back, even on the life that I've lived so far, I'm pretty young in terms of my professional journey. I'm pretty new to it, but I've gotten to do work that's like this for, I would say like probably 12 years at this point. And when I think about what's been most meaningful in my life up until this point, it's been the relationships that I've formed with people so far, both in a professional capacity, but in the friends that I've made through that process in general have been largely due to that. I was thinking about it today, even just because I mentioned how much I grew up loving to do ballet. And one of the things that I've thought about, this is a season where there are a lot of dancers that I know that are working really hard, and they're doing a performance of a ballet that, is extremely difficult on the body. And so when I looked at what that would be like if I went down a different path, if I chose the path of becoming a professional dancer or something like that, I thought to myself, gosh, at this point in time, I would probably hate my job. I would be so exhausted physically. I'd be so worn out emotionally. I'd just be dead. And so I just think one of the challenges of the way that we approach work in our culture is that we do it in a way that even if you love what you're doing more than anything else, it does still have the capacity to suck you dry.
And and it absolutely, and I think that's the interesting thing is that and this might be for a whole other podcast, but our relationship, our relationship to work is that your worth is your ability to output, right? And I think that that's a big part of Western culture. Is that we've bought into that idea that that your work is part of your worth as a human being, and if you're not working, then your worth diminishes, which is kind of counterintuitive because the whole thing that we're talking about, which is hilarious, is that if you use this scenario, you quit work immediately and you go and you live your life, which shows you that that's absolutely not true. Because if that was your worth, you would say, well, I got to work even harder now that I have this diagnosis because that's the thing that's going to bring me worth and value in my life. But we know, in some ways we know that it's fallacious to actually believe that to be true, yet we buy, it's like we've bought into it on some level, which is sad to me because, this is something that I've gotten to now. I'm 45 years old and, I realize that now I am definitely at the halfway point. Maybe less. I'm more than likely less. So something that I think is interesting is that now I'm like, oh, I do have less time, and I have a less of a willingness to sacrifice that time for things that I don't think are worthwhile. And I've noticed there's a switch that's gone on. And I think that it's interesting. It's not that I'm less patient with people, because I would still be patient with people. But if I'm asked to do something that I feel is an absolute waste of my time, I often will just say, no thanks, I don't have any desire to do it. And I think when I was younger, I was much more willing to say, oh, okay, like what's the big deal? No big deal. But now I realize if I do that, it's a trade-off. And that trade-off means less time with my sons, it means less time with my wife, less time with my friends. And to me, it's not to say that I'm not willing to sacrifice things. I'm willing to sacrifice for people who need help and who are deserving of help and who require help. I'm willing to sacrifice and make time for them. Absolutely. But, I'm now much more discerning, because you can define a lot of things as being worthy of a sacrifice. Now I've narrowed it down a lot more, where I'm like, if I'm going to spend my time with people doing something, it needs to be something that I feel has a payoff down the road. And I think that, unfortunately, that sounds very transactional. And I don't mean payoff in the sense that I'm going to get something back, like I'll get money or something like that. No, the payoff is, was there a deepening of a relationship as a result of the time? That to me is what is so critically important to anything that I do.
Yeah. Well, there are two thoughts that come to mind hearing that. And one is it's fascinating how proximity to death brings this proximity to life.
Absolutely.
And I've seen that just being around people who live in cultures where there's less access to good health care. And so you can see that if you get a minor injury, there's a greater chance that it will impact your ability to live a long and healthy life. Those people, they don't waste their time doing mundane tasks. They don't worry even about stupid things. I mean, the things that I can get myself in a thought spiral over that don't matter, it's astounding. I mean, truly, the fact that I would waste any time worrying about something frivolous when you think about, gosh, I only have this one wild and remarkable life. That's it, and I'm gonna sit here and worry about how somebody thinks about how I look or how I say something. It's remarkable, but I just find it so fascinating that we have to kind of cross a certain barrier in terms of our age and our life, or we have to see someone suffer greatly to really appreciate that. It would be nice to just really understand somewhere deep in our lives and our spirits that that's a reality at any point. But I think the other point that kind of everything that you're saying brings to mind is that when you end up looking back on your life, or when you think about the life that you want to live, it's not often too difficult to get clarity about what we want to be able to look back on our life and say that we did, or say that we valued and poured into. It's obviously what we've spent the whole time talking about, the relationships that we've built. I mean, I don't want to wait another moment to live the life that I want to live.
Yeah. And yet, after we're done, you'll probably go back to work, right?
I sure will. Yeah. Yeah, but you know what? I'll say I'm not doing any of that bullshit. Are you kidding?
Yeah. I'm sure I can see you saying that directly to your boss.
Yeah.
So and this brings us kind of the closing thoughts around this, which is, what are some ways that we can readjust our lives so that we have the capacity to do the things that are most important to us now without needing a cancer diagnosis, or without living 45 years and being well, geez, I should have done more with it.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that we have to understand is just how, the word that's coming to mind is zombified we are. There's a group of students I work with that are very into this speech from David Foster Wallace called "This is Water," where he essentially talks about the mundane aspects of our lives and the way that we become fish who don't realize that they're in water. In other words, you can become so desensitized and unaware of the great life that exists around you. And so I think recognizing, in the David Foster Wallace speech, it's recognizing it's called This Is Water. So you recognize you're in water and you're able to appreciate these fine details and the choice that you have to make the most of every moment, because that's so often what we forget. And so for me, I think I actually had to kind of do a little bit of this. I don't want to call it necessarily, I would call it maybe a quarter life crisis, but I would say it was really like I came to a reawakening in the midst of the pandemic in 2020. And what helped me a lot was I would just find things, I would go through like every day and just think about these things that I had experienced and find moments that were really good. And it helped me not just to like go back through a day and note what was good. It helped me after doing that to appreciate a moment while it was actually happening. And so like I think in the positive psychology movement, they really believe in doing something called 3 good things, which is where when you start the day, when you end the day, and probably like midday as well, you just think of 3 good things. And I think it helps you to appreciate and be mindful of what's around you.
Oh, I agree. I think you're kind of talking about going from here, to just seeing a little further out. And I really believe that to be true, that I think one of the things that yanks, because we talked about this earlier, the idea of you get caught in your anxieties, you get caught in kind of this thinking, and you're up in your head. Like you're constantly, like I think most people are up in their head. Now, we differ in maybe what we're thinking about and what we're worried about and all that stuff, right? But we all, I think we all are there, and sometimes that can be, you talked about how in our society now we're kind of like, if we're not up here, we're just like right here on a phone or something like that. So we're never really looking much further beyond us. And to me, I think that if you want to get to those moments of appreciation, which, we always say like, be in the present moment, enjoy what you have now. Easier said than done.
It's true.
Right? Much easier said than done, because you have to, the natural stasis of most people is I'm up here, I'm right here, I'm thinking about just everything that I have to do. It's my world, right? And what it takes to really be cognizant and present is you have to shove that stuff aside. You have to, again, as you said, make a choice. The more you have those moments of something catching your eye, something that's right in front of you, been there the whole time, but you didn't even realize it, that world around you is the way that I think you can really use your time in better ways. Because if we're talking about what's the most beneficial use of your time, it is being present in a moment with people who care about you, or being present in a moment where you're kind of not consumed by things that don't matter, right? So if you're taking both of those things, what does it take? It takes you like literally making an effort to do it, which frankly, given all of our concerns and the things that we have going on in our lives, much easier said than done. If you're worried about paying rent, yeah, you're not going to be able to do that. If you're worried about eating, if you're worried about a disease, if people in your life are worried about those things and you're there to take care of them, much easier said than done, because it becomes all-consuming, and that's very easy for us. However, I do think that it's easy also to tell yourself once or twice a day, hey, hold on a second. Like, let's shove these things aside, let's take a moment, let's put everything away, and let's focus on something beyond myself. So like in movies, the reason why like we love movies often is because they're able to, in a short period of time, right, pick out these really beautiful moments that we can focus in on, because you have a camera and it like focuses in on this moment, and it's of course manufactured to some degree. But why is it that we love certain movies? Oftentimes it's little things about the movie, of the way that they capture life, that you sit there and say, oh wow, that was like a really beautiful moment between these two characters in the movie, right? Mm-hmm. And so essentially, why do we relate to that so much? Because that's how we remember things. We remember these little chunks, these little moments, right? So I think the goal of your time on earth is to amass as many of those little moments as you possibly can in your mind of being with people, watching people, being on your own, whatever it is. But I think that that's ultimately the best use of your time is having those moments where you can look back and say, wow, that was something that was really meaningful to me to be a part of or to witness. And in some ways, it's not always just the experience for yourself. It is the witness to life that actually makes it so incredible. And I think that that's the problem with being here or being on your device, is that you're not really witnessing life anymore. Right. You're just consuming things and you're up here. What makes time worthwhile is the observation of the beauty of the world in which you're swimming, the life in which you're swimming all the time.
Sadly, the way our world works really erodes that and makes it very hard to actually do, like, the way I'm phrasing it of like, just think of 3 good things. It's like, well, okay, sure. But when you have a million things going on around you, not least of which being like a device that just feeds on our capacity to create more and more dopamine, it really is countercultural and kind of miraculous to be able to stop and appreciate these moments of beauty in our lives. And at the same time, I think the amazing thing is it only takes doing that once to really transform an entire day and even an entire way of seeing your entire life. So yeah,
I agree with that. Well, we've covered a lot in this, and I hope that it's given you some food for thought. We're going to come back next time with an entirely different topic that we're going to cover, but I want to thank you for being with us today, and let us know in the comments if you have any thoughts about how you would use your time. So wishing you the best, and I look forward to seeing you next time.